Welcome, everyone, to Provocative Conversations. We are very excited about this topic today, love during the time of COVID. Whether you are in love, wanting to be in love, or in a relationship that's kind of fizzling out or being affected by COVID, we really want you to stay tuned for our topics. We also have an unfortunate update that Dr. Alicia herself has COVID. How are you feeling, Dr. Alicia?
Well,
I mean,
it,
considering.
it's been a little rough.
Mm-hmm.
All of us in the house got the COVID.
Mm,
I'm actually a little surprised by how badly we got it. I mean,
mm.
none of us went to the hospital,
Right. Okay. That's good. That's a blessing.
so we're we're hanging in there. But this is a perfect topic for today because I can relate to a lot of the things we're going to cover here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, I just want to give the listeners a warning that we are going to be super raw today, Dr. Renee.
Yes. Yes. Very
I'm,
vulnerable, very
yeah,
honest, as we always are. But,
yeah,
when you're thinking about it's different when you are the doctor versus the patient. So, or being a podcaster host rather than a listener. So, we really do want to give very personal information about our own lives, about yours, just anything so that you can honestly relate to not only the topic, but also kind of have that opening in mind and thoughts of how you might be affected and not even know about how social isolation, quarantining, witnessing death of loved ones, or just hearing about the death of loved ones or loved people being sick can be psychologically affecting to you. And also how it can discourage you if you're an introvert or extrovert from being social, from wanting to explore relationships, or just lonely. We want to talk about all of those juicy, good topics today, these healing topics today.
yes. And, I'm personally feeling raw from this recent COVID
Mm-hmm.
episode. And, while both my husband and I, during the most difficult days we've had, there's a lot of fear and uncertainty surrounding it because you're
Mm-hmm.
infected by this virus, but you don't know what the outcome is going to be from that.
Right.
But I do think it's a great chance for us to be vulnerable and talk about love in the time of COVID together.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
looking forward
Mm-hmm.
to this episode.
Okay. And as things relate that pop up, we'll just talk about them as they apply to us.
Absolutely. And so the when my brain fog finally cleared,
Mm-hmm.
I had the idea that maybe we could pose a few scenarios and
Oh, I
then
like that.
maybe I'll just ask a question that I think that you're really well equipped to answer psychologically surrounding some of the behaviors and also just speaking to compassion and empathy or lack thereof that we have for others during this time
Mm,
of the
okay.
pandemic.
I like that.
Okay, cool. Because this also allows me not to talk too much.
Okay, good, good, good.
So, my first example is more of a generalization of a couple of people's experiences that I've learned about. And I'm trying to keep it not super specific because I don't want to, you know,
Out
I would,
anyone.
yeah, I want to protect the
Mm-hmm.
people whose stories that I've heard because it's their story to tell, not mine. But I do think
Okay.
there are some fundamental uh, connections here between these stories. But I've heard there are a lot of folks out there who are not getting the vaccine for a variety of reasons, and some of those are medical reasons or religious reasons. And so I don't mind sharing that I had COVID or that I'm vaccinated, but I don't feel like it's a good practice to have to broadcast personal health concerns or choices because I think this should always lie between a patient and a doctor.
Right,
Um,
right.
I
Which is why we have, whenever you go to the doctors, you do sign those HIPAA
right.
compliance. It's protecting your health information.
And we do seem to be in an age right now of little medical privacy, which I get because we're in a pandemic and some things have to shift. But I don't think we need to get into all those those things. But what I'm hearing from those that are unvaccinated, that are my friends, is that because of certain situations, there's a sense of isolation,
Mm-hmm.
rejection, lack of understanding or compassion or empathy because they're not vaccinated, and they're not able to even participate in activities if there are vaccination requirements, which again, I get why these things are enforced, but I think there some of my friends' stories. It's not even about official enforcement. It's like peers
Mm.
enforcing certain rules or activities or clubs. And for those that are choosing not to be vaccinated, again, I'm not going to um, reveal whether that's medical or religious or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's having a devastating effect on certain people because of this isolation. And we know that isolation has an impact on mental health.
Right.
So whether we agree or disagree with people's choices, and there's a huge debate around all of this. That's not
Mm-hmm.
what I want to talk about. I want to talk about the psychology behind why we have reached a point in which compassion and empathy for others seems to be lacking right now.
Okay.
Basically, I'm a person who was raised to love one another, and I'm just feeling like there's this lack of ability to do that for others right now. So
Mm.
that's my first question posed for you.
Okay. Well, you might be having a little bit of a COVID uh thought process. I wasn't really sure where you're going with that, but I think I get the gist of it. So, there is a division between humans whenever it comes to anything. And we talked about the psychology of racism and how it's understandable to me from a scientific and psychological standpoint of when you look at just being able to survive. The same thing happens in every group of any type of organism that lives in a community atmosphere. So, just for example, we're talking about, are you vax or are you an anti vaxxer? So, the people who are vaccinated are giving a label as anti because anti is very inflammatory right now. And it shows that you are against this. And it's making it very salacious and a very you versus us. But if you go all the way down to when you're a little kid, it's like, oh, you're a boy, you have cooties, or oh, you're a girl, you do whatever. So there's very obvious differences. Even in the medical field for addictions, there is a hierarchy that people will use for levels of addiction within the community of persons who are experiencing substance abuse addiction. For example, you're seen at a higher level quality wise of addiction if you are someone who just snorts. But if you are someone who smokes, that's also considered like a higher level. So if you're just a smoker, like you're smoking, like marijuana, okay, you consider yourself better than someone who might be smoking cocaine through like a crack pipe. Persons who smoke through a crack pipe see themselves better than persons who might use injection IV for drugs. So this, are you vax? Are you not vax? This is just a continuation of divisive psychology that people use to understand, are you with us? Are you against us? And if you're against us, are you judging me? And if you're judging me, how do I protect myself and those who are like me? And if you're feeling a sense of low self esteem, you then use whatever your vaccination status is or other group status is to then bring down others who you see is less than you because they're not at whatever your level is. So the vax versus anti-vax, having to proclaim your vaccination status or proclaim your mask wearing beliefs has become more intensified because during the previous presidency, division was something that was used as a claim to fame. And so this is the continuation of the trauma that American politics has experienced. and it's trickled down into just vaccination status. When it comes to, okay, well, now this is in our social life. If you can't come to the soccer playground or the cookie bake sale unless you have a vaccination proof, from a pandemic control standpoint, that makes very, very much sense. It's very clear. It's helping to protect and keep people safe. But what it's become used to do is to now also bring in isolation and judgment. And that's where we have to recognize that you decide to be vaccination, I decide not to be vaccination. You decide to be vegan, I decide to be a meat eater. And yet we can still all get along. And it may seem like I'm simplifying it as far as vaccination or vegan, but I want people to understand that it really is just that simple, as long as you are abiding by the safety guidelines of quarantining and social isolation, regardless of whatever your beliefs are for vaccination or not vaccination. The problem is it's not being done that way. People are not looking at it as a simple human choice, and you're also abiding by other safety guidelines. They're using it as a chance to further social distance as a social sense, meaning you're against us or we're against you, we're better than you, or you are less than we are, and using that to be more divisive, and it causes more mistrust and anxiety and isolation socially, which then leads to depression, suicide, and other complications.
So you were talking about the need for this during a pandemic, like the social distancing and quarantining, et cetera. Like right now, my viral load is probably pretty high, so I shouldn't go out in public and spread this virus.
Correct.
And I think that that's pretty simple, but I also think that the politics around this, like you had mentioned from the last president, has made it way not simple, because other people's choices are going to impact my family regardless of what I do. And you know what I'm saying? So like sometimes I don't even think it's the people that are experiencing this, like the regular day-to-day people, but it's like a political motivated by design.
It is. It has just become the way of life of us versus them. And it's more destructive than helpful. You know, there's a psychological experience called cognitive dissonance. And again, cognitive dissonance means that the more you believe or the more you do something, the more likely you're going to continue believing something, even if it's crazy or more dangerous, or you'll continue to keep being in the upsell. So if you spent $9.99 for a latte, obviously I'm hungry. So if you spent $9.99 for a latte, then okay, of course, what's the big difference if I add in $2 more for the organic, fat-free, gluten-free whipped cream? So the more you justify your initial action, the more likely you're going to justify subsequent actions. So when it comes to vaccine status, and when it comes to the how it's becoming politicized, which therefore leads to people feeling socially and individually isolated, it's a reflection of cognitive dissonance, meaning that, well, I took the vaccine or I got the vaccine because of X, Y, and Z. And therefore, because now I see that my political party or my family or my community heavily supports this, that I'm going to become even more diligent or more strong in my beliefs that support my decision to become vaccinated. The alternative is also true. I chose not to become vaccinated for X, Y, and Z reasons. And I'm seeing in my personal community that not becoming vaccinated is supported, is applauded, is whatever. And therefore, you become more stringent and more firm in your beliefs of why you didn't. But when you then have it politicized and it causes division, all it really does is make a person more determined to stick to their original beliefs, even if they may have some doubt. So, my suggestion, if I'm advising political leaders, is don't make it a divisive, don't make it a you have to do this or you have to do that. And if you don't, you're this big bad, COVID boogeyman in either direction. Because when you do, all it does is trigger psychological defenses of, okay, well, now I'm going to really stick to what I'm saying. And there's no way you're going to push me to do this or do that. So it actually hurts more than helps when it comes to actually mask mandate or social distancing behavior, because then you're just triggering psychological dissonance, which makes them less likely to want to change their beliefs and definitely less likely to want to change their behaviors.
And we've talked about this, and maybe we'll do this in an upcoming episode, but just
Mm-hmm.
there are other countries that have a completely different response and a completely different populist attitude about COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it just goes back to the state of our political division in this country.
Right.
And so, a lot of what we talk about kind of does go back to that, I think.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, that's because politics has become such a way of life for us. And politics, in a sense that it's a protection to avoid or to eagerly engage in, rather than a chance to provide empowerment, equality, and equity so that we can all just truly live a great life.
I agree with that. So let's shift to another similar topic,
Mm-hmm.
which this is more about isolation. So, there are
Okay.
those who are living alone, or those might live with others, but who aren't their friends or family, like a roommate situation, or
Right. Okay.
maybe those living with their family, but not their friends or lovers. um, maybe maybe those who share custody with an ex, and so they are alone some of the time, and maybe with their children or child other times. A
Mm,
lot of these people in these situations have not had human touch, or sometimes even interaction, depending on the situation, um, for months or even possibly years. I mean, this has been going on for 2 years now.
yes, it has.
Can we talk about the impact that this lack of human touch or intimacy can have on us?
Yes, let's start with the human physiology, biology of human touch. There was a landmark study of children in orphanages in China. This is, of course, when I was in my doctoral program. And what we learned is, you're only able to have, a certain number of children as mandated by their government. And so the children that were not male, they often ended up in orphanages. And so, as psychologists, the experiment was a lot of the children were dying and not having viable lives. They had a high infant mortality rate. And what they found is when they had the nuns or the nurses who were just holding the babies in their arms, they did nothing else, not talking and cooing or anything like that. Those babies were more likely to live and to live longer than the babies that did not have human touch. And so we just have evidence biologically showing that infant mortality rates can be reduced. That's why when you have the baby, as soon as the baby comes out, they put the baby right on the mom's breast to create that connection. Obviously, it stimulates hormones, and helps with the immunity system, but also it shows that in life, after you survive your infancy and you become an adult, having human touch is very crucial to being able to have higher levels of immunity for your health, and also feeling a sense of social connection and decreasing depression. So, human touch is very
Mhm.
important. Well, when we have the social distancing and the quarantining, for safety reasons, people are either locked in their rooms or they're 6 and 12 feet away from someone at the grocery store, and we don't have that connection physically, and we don't even have a chance to even rubbed by somebody, then not in a perverted sense of the way. I'm going to clarify. I'm going to clarify that. Then you are likely to have higher rates of depression, a compromised immune system, which could then, of course, make you more vulnerable to COVID-19, but also making you feel more depressed and lonely from just human touch alone. So it's very, very important. And not to be, too, well, I guess we are, this is what we do. But even when it comes to, sexuality, not being able to, if you're separated from your partner and you lose that sexual connection, like if they're in the military and you have an absence of their physical or sexual touch, then that does lead to a sense of depression, loneliness. And you're like, I just wanted to just hug that person one more time, because that's what you really are longing for, is the emotional connection produced from the physical touching. So yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I had also heard about the newborn, like the premature babies, like
Mm-hmm.
if they were held, I think they call them kangaroo pouches,
Yes, that's right.
where the babies, if they were in these pouches next to their mom or dad or another, you know,
Mm-hmm.
human skin, they
Mm-hmm.
managed to heal much more rapidly and had
Yes.
better outcomes.
Yes,
So
very true.
human touch, and
Just
um,
human touch, just holding hands or just being, in a room with someone, even just shaking hands with someone, that's still a
mhm,
human touch that people will often miss. Just, you could be at church and you're like giving someone a hug. So it's a very,
mhm,
non sexual hug, but just not being able to hold hands, shake someone's hands in public or in a business meeting, or giving out hugs at church or when you see one of your friends. It can be very difficult, especially even if you're in a medical situation. You may not even be able to give a hug to your patient because you're like, well, let me make sure I keep social distancing and only do exactly what's medically required. I do also want to emphasize that the absence or the presence of social touch is linked back to racism. As I shared before, just having your back against the back of another person of a different race will significantly decrease racist thoughts or the tendency to believe racist ideology, because you now have had close contact and touch with someone who was of that different race. So, human touch is very important, not only for the survival of children or for the betterment of our society, but also to help people not feel so lonely and then have higher rates of depression, or loneliness, and wanting to feel as if their whole life is hopeless and then succumbing to suicide.
yes, and I think that's a good segue to our next discussion,
Okay.
and which this one's going to be a little harder. Which let's just talk about death. I'll
Yes,
admit,
yes. Because
having
I did want to say, when you were saying that you were having a hard time imagining what will be the outcome, that is what everyone thinks. And that's the reason why that sense of fear is so, it makes it so attractive and instinctual to say you're a vaxxer, you're an anti vaxxer, because they feel as if lives are on the line. And, why wouldn't you want to be able to identify who would be a threat?
Mhm.
um that's how, when we have cognitive behavior or cognitive understanding of beliefs, what we do is we make general assumptions very quickly about a person and an environment or a neighborhood, and those quick assumptions become our core beliefs, and that helps us for the main goal of being able to live longer and to be able to quickly assess a threat. And so now, because we know that COVID has a high death probability, then being able to say, okay, well, you're a vaxxer, you're an anti-vax, or we need to isolate, even though isolation can lead to depression, it's because of that very real threat of death being there. So when you think about your own mortality, Dr. Alicia, like, what were you thinking when you first had the diagnosis?
Um, I think at first I was just, taking it in stride because I was also caring for my other family members.
Mm-hmm.
But then, at night, that's when things would get dark because, it was harder to breathe at night.
Mm.
Probably just naturally laying on your back and being in a deep sleep
Right.
makes it, your body slowing down. But when you're sick, you're really focused
Mm-hmm.
on what your body is doing. So, there were times, a couple of nights, and my husband agreed too. He had similar thoughts. It was like, oh man, am I going to have to go to the hospital? Is this, getting worse? And also, we were feverish. We had high fevers.
Mm.
There were a lot of symptoms going on. So I think it did give me a lot of time to think about that. And that was very anxiety ridden.
Mm-hmm.
So on
Mm-hmm.
top of like feeling, oh man, I'm having a hard time breathing, you start having anxiety, which then makes it harder to breathe.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and I'll tell you, so here's a little tip for those
Mm-hmm.
in the
Mm-hmm.
world. If you come down with the COVID and it's bad, because I know not everybody has a bad case,
Right.
but what I did in one of my nights of panic uh, is I put on my Apple Watch
Mm-hmm.
and I took my heart rate
Mm-hmm.
and then I took my blood oxygen level and I
Okay.
I also did my I think there's one other thing you can do which monitors if you have AFib. So I did all
Mm-hmm.
of these like screenings from my watch and everything was
Right.
normal and I was like, okay,
Okay. Okay.
your heart rate isn't too high or too low, your blood oxygen is above 95%. Like,
Right.
even though I know the
Right.
watch doesn't diagnose or whatever, it was
Right.
somehow gave me more control over my,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Well, that's
understanding.
just a symptom of being a nerd. So it's like, okay, well, how can I how can I endure this, dreaded diagnosis? Okay, I know I'll get some data.
Yep, pretty
but
much.
that's a good thing because when it comes to, panic attacks, it's because people imagine the worst. When it comes to anxiety or fear, high levels of fear, we do encourage everyone, okay, well, let's look at the facts. Are you able to get your heart rate? Are you able to still breathe? Can you still taste something? So I thought what you did was a very, well, obviously unbiased, very great way of analyzing real data so that you can make an informed decision rather than getting carried away with your thoughts of worry and thoughts of death and thoughts of, greater illness. And then that making it an even more uncomfortable physical and psychological experience.
Yes, and that definitely helped me. And I was in that moment. I was like, "Am I going to have to go to the hospital?" And then, like,
Mm-hmm.
if you go to the hospital and you get on the ventilator, and I went
Oh,
down that
yeah.
path, and that really did help me get out of that pretty quickly because I realized, if something was wrong, you would know.
Right, right. That's true. Well, I'll make sure I contact Apple Watch to get an endorsement for this podcast advertisement. Yeah, just
For sure.
anything you can use, just get actual data. I think that was a good idea and a good suggestion to anyone.
And I believe there are other watches out there that do some of those things. So, but I do have the
Mm,
newer version, and it does have
okay.
that fancy, a couple of fancy things on there. But I didn't die, so
Yes. Thank you, God.
that's
Yes.
yes, that's great. But there have been over, I think the last news I saw said there was over 900,000 COVID related deaths in
Mm,
the US. And I,
mm-hmm.
I do believe that that number is likely lower than reality because there is a lack of consistent reporting and
Right.
compliance of data collection in some states. And there have been a lot of deaths. So we're going to talk about death now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I don't know about you, but I've had a death in the family. My grandfather passed away in
Mm,
the winter of 2020. Um, he passed away from COVID. He was hospitalized. My grandmother too, and she made it through, but he did not. They were married for over 75 years,
oh,
maybe more.
wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
and he died in isolation in the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
I think the only person he had contact with was a nurse, which thank God she or he was there to be with my grandfather.
Yeah.
Um, you know, it was really sad. Like we had some videos that were taken through a glass window of him.
Oh.
He was very religious. He was a preacher, and he
Mm-hmm.
told us that God was with him, and
Right.
his he was looking forward to going to heaven. And but anyway, I've
Hmm.
had other friends pass from other related things, and for my grandfather, I've even had people dismiss his death because
Mm.
he was elderly, and
Oh, wow.
like, well, he was going to die anyway. In fact,
Wow.
my husband's grandmother passed as well, and
Hmm.
she was actually 101.
Oh,
And she passed away from COVID, but it's a similar response, like, well, it was bound to
right.
happen. So
Well, let,
um,
let me just interject here. When it comes to the psychology of when people do dismiss deaths like that, even though it's definitely
mhm,
horrible, it comes from a sense of trying to take control, and control giving a sense of safety. So we see this happening a lot when it comes to rape victims, when it comes to someone who has seen someone else who was killed. What we will do instinctively to make ourselves feel more safe is to say, okay, well, maybe I was raped because I had on this dress, and therefore I won't wear that dress anymore, and therefore it won't happen. Or if we see someone like in this COVID example, okay, well, your grandfather died because he was old. So, okay, I'm not going to use those statistics to add into my fear of COVID, because I'm just going to just easily write that one off. So,
mhm.
although from a personal level, it is disheartening to hear, from a psychological level, that is one reason why it makes it easier for people to dismiss tragic things happening.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a part of it too is just like sort of denial that COVID
Oh,
has had
yes.
any kind of impact on our society or whatever. And it's like,
Yeah.
I mean, the thing about my grandfather's death is that true, he was, bound to, we are all bound to die.
Very true.
He was lucky to live for, 96 years. I believe that's how old he was when he died. But he died in isolation
Yeah, that's so
behind,
sad.
like, I don't
Yeah.
know, that isn't insignificant. Like, he could
No.
have passed away in his sleep in the bed with my grandmother, where he had
Hmm.
spent, more years than we can.
96 years. Yeah.
Yeah, so anyway, so there's that. But also, uh, I mean, I'm sure this is a familiar story for many people who are listening, but I've also had a couple of friends die from suicide over the past
Hmm.
couple years.
Hmm.
I do
Hmm.
believe this goes back to the feeling of isolation,
Yes, it
despair.
does.
If you're a person who gets energy from other people, not being able to have that outlet has been really, really hard. So
Hmm.
it's important for us to think about the psychological toll that death has had on us as a collective society, and how this impacts our worldviews and also ability to love each other.
Definitely, because when you have the isolation and when you have death, it can then make you go into a depression state, because you're not able to have that social connection, what then can lead to suicide, or just make you hesitant to go out and to try to make friends or make acquaintances, meeting your new love, etc. The usually the persons who it did experience, higher levels of suicidality or higher levels of depression, it really could be based off of your need to achieve or your need to be busy, and also something as simple as where you fall on the continuum of introversion and extroversion. Most people think that introversion is only one thing and extroversion is just the other, the opposite personality. But it really is like on a continuum. So you might just be more extroverted, but you still have some introversion. You might be more introverted and have some extroversion, or you could be fully introverted and then fully on the other end of fully extroverted. What we're seeing is that the more introverted you are, the more likely you were to have higher levels of happiness during the quarantine and lower levels of depression and lower levels of death by suicide. Because obviously, persons who are introverted, they really enjoy being able to have a quiet time, being able to have time to think, and not having the extra pull of being forced to be social. whereas extroverts were obviously more likely to have higher levels of depression, higher levels of loneliness, because they actually need that physical interaction, the physical and social touch of being with other people. Let's look at the biology of what makes someone an introvert or an extrovert, meaning the more introverted you are, the more you prefer to be alone. Biologically, you have higher natural levels of cortical arousal, meaning that your body is already in a heightened cortical arousal state, and therefore you look for ways to calm your body down so that you're not being constantly aroused and constantly on edge. Whereas extroverts are born with low levels of cortical arousal levels. And because they have lower cortical arousal levels, then they are looking for ways to bump that up, which is why they're more likely to do extreme sports, to constantly want to be social and to meet friends, because they truly do get energy and energized from being around other people. Whereas introverts become drained because there's too much energy being built on top of the high energy that they already have inside their body. So when it comes to looking at being social, being suicidal, or as we're going to talk about as far as, dating and making friends, introverts are more likely to thrive during pandemics or during quarantines rather than extroverts. But what happens is you can have persons who are less likely to have meaningful connections because they're either giving into their natural desire to be introverted, or they're being forced to give in to being introverted when they are an extrovert. So if you are more of an introverted person and you're talking about the psychological toll that death can have, then it's very, overwhelming. And therefore, it may want you to have even less friends or to have less social connections, even if it were to be on social media. But for extroverts, that makes them feel even more lonely and more alone. And therefore, they have a higher, more desire to have those connections. Any questions so far, Dr. Alicia?
No, that makes sense. I think, there's also sort of people in between those two things, right?
That's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
Which,
like say, yeah. So
yeah,
say
go
for
ahead.
example, you can be very introverted when you're at home. You may still enjoy your quiet time, but you may have a very social activity for your career. For example, Barbara Streisand, who's on stage everywhere, is an introvert. And so she gets very nervous on stage, but she's a very social person when it comes to being on stage. So if you're more so in the middle, then it's just more of a matter of, okay, well, how can I navigate these two parts of myself? I'm both, I'm not on one end of an extreme introvert. I'm not an extreme extrovert. And so therefore I'm in the middle, like most people are. But because I'm in the middle, I have a higher chance of being able to be okay sometimes when I'm forced to be isolated or forced to quarantine. But then that extrovert part of me is feeling like, okay, well, now 2 days of doing this is enough. I'm ready to get out and I'm going to go stir crazy if we don't go somewhere. So it
Yeah.
really becomes a battle of trying to figure out how to balance both of them. And sometimes persons may say, okay, well, how come I can't just be okay with this? So you might have higher achievement needs where being forced to be quarantined is preventing you from being able to accomplish or to do what you desire. So even if you were a very high functioning introvert, and you are very successful, in your work or your school, being forced to not being able to do anything inside your house can still be very depressing, even for the high level introvert, because then your ability to actually do or achieve is being stopped.
Yes, I think what I hear you saying is it's very it's not cut and dry. It's very
That's
complicated how
right.
people
Yeah.
are experiencing whatever they're experiencing right now.
Yeah, but there is a general understanding and a general experience of isolation, of loneliness, and of feeling despair and uncertainty about the future. So there is across the globe, but definitely for America, a more individualistic society where there's more of a fear of not being able to achieve in life and also not being able to have social or meaningful connections. So everyone does have a little bit of depression, a little bit of achievement anxiety, because there is so much uncertainty of when you can have a new life, what that new life will be. And if you are afraid of getting back out there, it makes it more, difficult to actually be social whenever we do return to the quote unquote normal.
Yes, and I think also back to the my own situation with my grandfather, another hard
Mm-hmm.
thing for both my husband and I with his grandmother and my grandfather is we made the choice not to attend any services,
Okay.
um, because one, it would have required travel, and two, it was pre-vaccine times, so we weren't
Mm,
comfortable with the risks that would pose. But there was a feeling of like, uh, uh, just not being able to be with your family and
yeah.
not be able to say goodbye to your loved ones. I know that I've heard a lot of other people experience this as well, where they've had
Mm-hmm.
a family member pass and they didn't get to send them off on the proper farewell that they would
Mm-hmm.
have been able to prior to the pandemic. So that's also just really difficult to deal with, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it increases a sense of survivor guilt because then you feel as if, well, we didn't even get a chance to say goodbye to auntie this person or your nephew, or even if it was a younger person, you feel as if you weren't able not able to be there for them. And although there were global constraints of why you were not able to, it does increase your sense of guilt and your sense of depression, which is why we're seeing so much of the suicide rates increasing, because people are not able to connect in ways that they need to feel alive, to feel loved, or to show love. And so the isolation, is very harmful psychologically. On a greater end, if you are in prison and you go into solitary confinement, one reason why it's so uncomfortable and traumatic is because you are forced to be isolated and you're in a very small room. So now it's like the whole world is in solitary confinement psychologically and geographically, because you can't go anywhere. And there are the same type of experiences of loneliness, of depression, of feeling like maybe I'm going to go crazy here, of doubt about yourself and who you are and who you could be or who you're supposed to be during this time. So the isolation is very real, and it can have very lasting traumatic effects on what you do going forward and how you live your life and with whom you choose to live your life.
And that's a great transition to the last case that I thought we could talk about.
Okay.
And because I think this one is more about being in relationships during this time.
Mm-hmm.
So, for couples out there, there's been a lot of stress, I think,
Yes.
on
Yes.
relationships. There's, our patience runs thin with each other. We might be snapping at our partners more
Mm-hmm.
quickly, getting on each other's nerves over the little things.
Mm-hmm.
And believe me, Dr. Renee, this one is something I
You're keeping it real, Dr. Olisha.
you know, we've been in isolation a lot over the past 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
I work from home. My
Mm-hmm.
husband is unemployed. You know, we've had a lot of, like I said, quarantines with
Yeah.
a young child in public school, and I do want to give a shout out to my husband though, because despite
Yes.
all of these ups and downs, dealing with his, being unemployed, our quarantines, the
Mm-hmm.
uncertainty, the fear, this recent bout, we've managed to actually come out stronger so far
Good, 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 good.
as a unit.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to lie, it's been challenging at the best of times. Like yesterday we bickered a lot. There are
Mm-hmm.
days where we just bicker a lot, and then there are days where
Mm-hmm.
we have we watch a movie together and things are cool.
Right.
But so what are
Yes.
the psychological reasons that couples either pull away or come together in times like these? And just in general, what are
Mm-hmm.
ways that we can use this time of quarantine or being more together, if that's your situation, to
Okay.
help our relationships be a source of solace and love. And
Okay. So oftentimes the pandemic or being snowed in can be a litmus test for how connected a couple is. And so, say, for example, you are already doing pretty well. You're going to work 8 hours a day. He's going to work. Then you afterwards, you're busy with the kids. So, on the surface, it may seem as if it's very high functioning, high connection, affectionate, no hard feelings because most of your time is spent apart. When you're forced to be together due to the quarantine, then you start to realize, wait a minute, I didn't realize you smacked that loud when eating your French fries. Or wait a minute, I didn't realize that's how you look when you don't have all of your makeup on going to work. I forgot about that part. And so what you see is that when you're forced to be with someone 24 hours a day, seeing each other, hearing each other, going by each other, there's only but so much tolerance you can have for that much energy being forced into a very small or being confined into a very small location. Even if you have a mansion, it's still not as big as the whole world being able to separate and go away to work or go away to the gym for extended periods of time. So whenever you have this forced togetherness, then what happens is that you start to nitpick because now you see more of the things that you were not able to be previously exposed to on a constant basis because you weren't thinking about it. So, in one way, being quarantined, it helps clarify, well, how really connected are we and how well do we really know each other? But I do want to say that even if you were single and you had a clone of yourself during quarantine and you were stuck together with your clone, then you would be sick of your clone as well. So I would encourage every couple to understand that it's not that your partner is less attractive or is more irritating. It's just the situation that is a very uncomfortable situation. And then if you were cloned in a room by yourself, you would become sick of yourself as well. So take the pressure off of yourself so that we have to be in love and we have to be able to use this time to watch Lifetime and, ESPN, together to prove that we can survive this and that our relationship is great. That's an unhealthy measure of your connection or marital solidarity. Instead, recognize that it's a very hard situation for any human to be in, being locked in, whether it was with your partner or with yourself. The second reason of why it's so frustrating is because now usually one person is more of the doer or the home maintainer than the other person. And so, because of this, the person who is doing more now has more work to do. So, whereas you might have had, you know, only laundry to do or to only clean up rooms or the living room once a week on Saturday, or maybe, 2 or 3 days after lacrosse practice, then now all the kids are home, all the family members are home, or just you and your partner are home. And now your spouse is making more mess that you now have to clean up. Now there's more dishes that you now have to wash. Now there's more meals that you have to cook or plan for. And so you're having more stress added to your family responsibility as a spouse, in addition to if you are also still working. So a lot of the pressure that's being added on to one person can cause resentment toward the other spouse or the other roommates because now, in addition to all the things that you were already doing, in addition to the secondary factor of possible death from being quarantined, now you have the third threat to your peace and stress-free life because now you have to worry about doing more work for someone else. And that's very stressful. And whenever you have stress, it's a psychological experience of having more demands on your physical and psychological resources than you have the ability to handle. Meaning that I'm only one person and I keep having more and more and more things added on to me. And I don't think I have the mental capacity, or the new buzzword now is bandwidth. I don't have the mental capacity or the bandwidth, the time, the finances, the space physically to do all of these things. So now I'm more stressed out, and I'm stressed out, and you're over there, watching Scooby Doo, living your best life, not even thinking about how you are adding more stress to me. So then there is the more of the resentment when it comes into couples. In that situation, I would encourage you to have an honest conversation of what not only has increased, but if you're working with males and females, so a husband and wife, then the brain and the thinking about solutions is different, especially if you add in different personality variables. So not only talk about it, but also bring in a piece of paper to show this is how my life was taking care of the home before COVID. I did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, label those things out. And then now this is how my life is different after, and adding in those additional, excuse me, 5 or 75 things that you are now having to do on a daily basis, and seeing, well, how can we come together to either one, let me realize I'm being controlling or type A, and I don't need to do all of those things. I'm making it harder for myself. Or two, how can we work to make this list more equitable, and that the household or the family responsibilities are being shared and it's not coming all on one person? And then when you do that, there's more division of the workload, and therefore there's less stress, which can increase your appreciation for each other and also your love connection. So those are just a few things just to get started with couples. There's also, in the beginning, it was a great honeymoon. We get to stay home. We don't have to do anything. We can be in our sweats all day and watch Netflix and chill, all these different kind of things. But after a while, like anything, familiarity breeds contempt. And so then you get bored of that, bored with each other, bored with the sex, or just, I can't even stand looking at you right now, approaches. So you need to just find different ways to be diligent and being creative on how you're going to have this current new normal of your marriage, or this current new normal of your um, roommate situation, so that you all can truly get along without bringing more irritation and frustration into the thick of things.
You know what we did?
What did you do? Have two separate rooms?
Well, we moved into a house that had more space so that we
Oh. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, we were
Yeah, that
outgrowing our
helps.
former home in the first place because we got it before we, were
Yeah. Well,
married
yeah.
and
So
had a
in case
kid.
you're not bawling like Dr. Alicia, let's just go get a whole new house. If you don't have that option, then what you can do is you can have, like, peace, Switzerland, no argument zones in your
Hey,
house if
that's a
you
good
want
idea.
to. In case you're not bawling like Dr.
I'm
O.
not. I'm not.
I'm
But
just
I am
playing.
grateful because I do have, because I work from home. So it's actually kind of, in my thinking, here I am
Hmm.
doubling down.
Right.
Um, in my thinking, like working from home means I need a dedicated space that's quiet and
Yes.
not a part of the household traffic. Before my former home, my office was a part of the flow through of the traffic. And
Hmm.
that just, when everybody was leaving the house every day, that was
Hmm.
fine. But now there are people here every
Hmm.
single
Hmm.
day. So
Yeah.
we did upgrade a little bit, but it was, for a long-term protection of my job and sanity.
Hmm. And even if you're not married, and even if you don't have any children, it's just you in your home alone, then still having boundaries of, this is where I work, this is where I eat, this is where I relax. Because otherwise, what's happening is there is an increasing level of stress just by yourself, because there is no separation of when you work and when you stop work and where you live your life. So I would also encourage you to have those, which would include set times when you're actually answering emails and doing your work or doing your school work, and then set times. I'm a big scheduler, obviously, to when you're going to eat, when you're going to have fun, go to the gym, etc., with your mask on, obviously. So still have boundaries, whether you're in the house by yourself or in the home with the family, having designated areas to do what and when. That can also help decrease some stress.
Those are great ideas. Really good
Thank you.
ideas.
Well, that's what I do. I did want to, also remind people that with my launch of journals, Journal Smarter. So follow me on Instagram at Dr. Renee Carr, and we'll also provide the links. But if you are having difficulty either keeping the flames alive in your marriage and you want to have a way to have a deeper connection and also hotter sex, which is the name of the book, Deeper Love and Hotter Sex, a 30-night challenge for couples. I provide very detailed, titillating, sensual exercises, conversation fire starters to help rebuild that connection or rekindle those flames when the pandemic or years of being together have kind of made you just kind of get used to the usual and you want to have more of the extraordinary in your marriage. So make sure you get that as well. And I guess I could give out a discount. So I guess if you use the promo code podcast, we'll think of something in there to give for you. Right now they're $24.99. So maybe we'll just give like what do you think? $5, $8, $10?
That's how loving are you feeling in this love
Well, I
episode?
guess I'm very loving and I'm very, you know what? I can give 50% off if they buy
Woo!
it before Valentine's Day. Because I really, really,
Nice.
so use the promo code podcast. And it's based off of my private collection, based off of when I was a traditional psychology private practice, and based off of my research of sexual psychology and marriage psychology. So it's not only a great, fun 30-night challenge to do with your spouse to, recover whatever you might have lost during the pandemic, but also it's based off of real science that actually can help you have more meaningful conversations. So definitely make sure you get it throughout Valentine's Day.
And I want to add back to the topic of mental health support. I
Mm-hmm.
do want to just say that if you're sad or depressed, you're not alone, that help is
Mm-hmm.
available. You can call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline.
Mm-hmm.
They're available 24/7, and the number is 1-800-273-8255.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Very good. And also, I guess my provoking action will be remember that a pandemic is unusual for almost everyone living in the world at this time. So be uh, sensitive and understanding with yourself and with your partner, with your children, recognizing this is new for all of us, and don't put too much pressure on yourself. If you're an introvert, I encourage you to not get so stuck in being alone that you don't take care of the relationships that you do have, whether it's by social media, email, texting, or video chat. And if you are an extrovert, I encourage you to not give into depression by using this time to maybe find out who are you as a person, and maybe have you use the social part of yourself as a way to get away from things that might have been bothering you, and as a way to cover up other things that might have been happening, maybe depression or maybe some other things that might have been unpleasant, and now just being social as a mask. I would definitely try that. Obviously, think of trying to help each other with a chore that you are used to doing by yourself. Maybe adding those together or separating them as your husband and wife, or as your couple or a family. And then also, last but not least, I always think that everything that happens is a new opportunity, like the yin and the yang, the crisis and opportunity. It's a way to get a more specific understanding, a more clear revelation of who you are and what your purpose in life might be. So use this forced downtime, use this forced isolation to think about, well, who am I as far as what my gifts are, my expertise, and my passions, and how can I use all of those to help others live a better life? What can I do for my purpose to then also help others? So those are just a few things that you can think of. And we will have part two next week, Dr. Alicia. What do we have in store for them?
Well, Dr. Renee, next week we will be taking a different approach. I do appreciate you tackling some of my questions about love in the time of COVID. Some of them were a little dark, but next week it would be great if we could answer some questions of our listeners. So if anybody who's listening is interested in posing some questions about love in the time of COVID,
Mm-hmm.
please private message us on social media or submit a comment on our website or reach out in whatever way you can, and we will answer your questions anonymously, so you don't have to worry about that. And we'd
We can
love
also put
to.
our email address, joinprovocativeconversations@gmail.com. We'll include all of those links in the website next to this podcast. That'll be great. We would love to hear your questions.
Yes, it would be awesome to have our audience participation in this topic, because I know everybody's experiences have been different and varied, and they're all worth talking about.
Yes. We are your provocateurs. I'm Dr. Renee.
And I'm Dr. Alicia.
Be informed, be entertained, be provoked.
And that's a wrap.
Yes, okay, that'll be good. I know that you were sick, with COVID, which I'm glad you're feeling better. But did you look at I didn't see it until after I did it, on the one post that has a microphone and it has two hearts next to it. It looks like a penis and scrotum. I was like, oh my goodness, I should take this one down. But then
subtle messages there.
I know, the Freudian slips. I was just like, I hope nobody sees that.